Hello, I'm here to talk about the architecture between Katello, Foreman, and Pulp 3. And as we pull in Pulp 3 into Katello, we will be living with Pulp 2 and Pulp 3 for some amount of time. It's unclear at this point how exactly long it will be, but they will coexist at least in the upstream code base for a while. And this is to allow for flexibility, to allow us to merge code in upstream in our Git repo's master branch, and allow us to deploy Pulp 3 before maybe we've finished everything we need to do to completely get rid of Pulp 2. So this is a diagram explaining exactly how a Foreman task action would be executed from a Katello API request. The request would come into the Katello v2 API, let's say repository create. It would kick off a Katello action, either synchronously or asynchronously, depending on the action or the API. The Katello action would probably create a bunch of active record objects. In the case of repository create, it would create a repository object. It would then call what I'm calling a pulp selector action. And the job of the pulp selector action is to take a smart proxy and figure out which pulp server it needs to talk to. So it would talk to the smart proxy object, and we'll explain in a little bit what the smart proxy object is actually doing. But it would ask the smart proxy object for this particular repository and for this particular smart proxy, which pulp server should I talk to, pulp 2 or pulp 3? Once it has an answer, let's say the answer is pulp 2, it would reach out to the pulp 2 action here on the left. And then that action would be planned, and as part of the run, it would call out to the pulp2 service class for that repository. So this would be like a yum service class or a file service class. If, however, that smart proxy told the pulp selector action to execute a pulp 3 action, it would likely call out to a pulp 3 orchestration action. And the reason we have this is most pulp 3 APIs don't correspond one-to-one with a pulp 2 API. They're completely different. It's even the structure of, or the type of objects you can create in pulp 3 are completely different. So here we need another layer of, I'm calling it the pulp 3 orchestration actions. And its job is to execute one or more pulp 3 actions. And each of these, similar to the pulp 2 actions, are going to reach out to pulp 3 service classes, you're usually just one service class, to make API calls. So here we have a few different layers. Starting at the bottom, we have the service class layer, and their job is really to make the API calls to the different pulp servers. It's also to know how to take Katello objects and extract data from them and reform that data into a way that the corresponding pulp server knows how to deal with. The pulp 2 and pulp 3 actions are basically just Dynflow representations of various things like repo create, repo sync, repo delete, repo update, those sorts of things. And then we have the pulp selector action, deciding which one to do, and then the Katello action, orchestrating all of the Katello stuff with the pulp stuff, and then finally the API, which is what the user interacts with. Now going to how the smart proxy actually communicates with the pulp 3 server. So the smart proxy in Foreman, or the smart proxy is an object in the Foreman database within the Foreman server. The Foreman server knows about the smart proxy, and smart proxies can have a list of capabilities and a list of settings. The smart proxy, when it does a refresh, will reach out to the actual the Foreman server, when it does a refresh on the smart proxy, will reach out to the smart proxy server via its v2 features API. And the goal of this refresh is to pull in all the feature information from the smart proxy. So on the smart proxy, we would need a Pulp3 plugin installed and enabled and pointing to a Pulp3 server. This new v2 features API can return exposed settings as well as a list of capabilities, as I said. But to get that list of capabilities, it's actually going to reach out to the Pulp3 status API on its configured Pulp3 server. And that status API is going to return a list of plugins, such as the file plugin, the yum plugin, the Docker plugin. So that will get sent back to the smart proxy, which will send that back as part of the v2 features API as capabilities to the Foreman server. And the Foreman server will store this list of capabilities and settings within the database for that smart proxy. So going back to our first diagram, when the pulp selector action is asking the smart proxy, for this particular repository, should I be talking to Pulp2 or Pulp3? It's actually looking at the capabilities that came from the smart proxy itself. Hopefully that answers some questions about how Katello is structured from a code standpoint and how smart proxies interact with the Pulp3 server. Thank you.